Well, good morning and welcome to our mini workshop today on becoming a chameleon, sharing a chameleon, being all about chameleon-like status. Some of you may have heard this on the audio download, but it's worth a few visuals. I'm going to be doing lots of graphs. It's going to be difficult to write down what you see on the screen. So if you want it, I can email you the PowerPoint. It's going to be PowerPoint heavy, right? But this will help you, I think. This will help you in relating to people. And I wished I had known this when I was on the book field. I wished I'd known this when I was recruiting teams. And this whole presentation came from a book I read a long time ago called Non-Manipulative Selling, which I thought was kind of a cool title. Non-Manipulative Selling by Tony Alessandra. So I'll give him credit. But it was kind of interesting because I remember sitting in houses where people looked at me and I looked at them and I thought, we're not connecting, are we? And I literally brought that up with people sometimes. I'd say, I'm feeling awkward. And they're like, yeah. And so I started to realize that people are wired differently. God gave us all different personalities. And the faster that you can find out who you're dealing with and connect with them, the more effective that you're going to be. And I can remember, when I was in a house, when I got frustrated with a family who wasn't reacting properly, I got more and more emphatic because that's my personality. More hand gestures, maybe a little louder, or maybe you don't quite understand what, and they sort of tightened up, and I was like, oh my gosh, and I was smart enough because I knew my sales talk that I realized there's nothing happening here, that we're in a massive disconnect. So what I'm going to cover, if you've ever been in a house where it didn't work, or if you've ever met somebody for the first time that you're like, I just felt yee around them. It was not comfortable talking to them. Has that happened to anybody? Or have you met anybody for the first time that you just instantly clicked and you're just like, wow, I feel like I know you. Have you had that happen? Okay, that's what this stuff's all about, which is what I want to cover. Okay? So, let's kind of jump in. Why is this called the chameleon thing? Because chameleons change colors. Correct answer. And what that means is that we have to adapt to our surroundings, the people that we're with, not expect them to adapt to us. Normally, if you know anything about chameleons and you see them sitting on a branch or in a tree, the tree doesn't change color to adapt to the lizard. So we're going to take the initiative to do that. Okay? So, you've heard of the golden rule? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you, right? The golden rule. Well, Alessandro in his book said, well, there's even a platinum rule, which is do unto others as they would like to be done unto. Does that make sense a little bit? In other words, sell people the way they want to be sold, not the way you like to sell. See, I like to sell by entertaining. I'd literally put on it wasn't much of a show, but a little show in the house. And I would take charge, and Mom would be there, and I'd say, hey, sit there, let me go get the kids. I'd run out back and go, hey, come inside. And they're like, oh. I go, I know, I'm a stranger. It's okay. Come in, And I would pull out my telescopic pen, and I would have them hold the books. And I'm like, and here's the math section, And so I'd kind of twirl it a little bit. And over here's, because it made it fun for me. And fun was important on my personality style. Now, that worked with some of the families who appreciated fun and a little humor and a little engagement. Other families, they thought I was a complete flake and a crazy man. And they didn't buy. So we'll learn why shortly. Okay, so here's what we got to figure out when we meet somebody for the first time. You need to figure out first, is this person a high responsive person or a low responsive person? In other words, high verbal, high facial expressions, high outgoing, or kind of quieter, lower, a little more difficult to read. Do you understand that concept, what I mean by responsive? Right? High responsive people have trouble in poker. Low responsive people don't have problems. They have poker faces. You don't really know what they're thinking. I'm not good at poker. I'm high responsive. So when I get a bad day, I'm like, ah. Okay, that would be a high responsive person. A low responsive person looks at their hand and goes, and that's what you get. So play poker with all your customers. That's where I'm headed. Not really. Next. What? You got to figure out, is this person high assertive? Are they assertive? Not aggressive, although that's a good indicator if they're aggressive. They're very assertive. Do they like to take charge, or are they low assertive? Okay? Would they like to run the show, be in charge? If you're in a sales situation, do they kind of like to be the boss of the environment? That would be a high assertive person. Very polite. No, you go ahead here. That's a lower assertive person. All right? Does that kind of, I'm just defining our terms because we're going to use them for the next few minutes. Now, the woman on the screen that you see there, just from that snapshot, what would you say on the high assertive or low assertive? High. She's asserting herself. She's like, you need to listen. Okay, that body language is just telling you something right there. All right? So you're going to become, hopefully, in the area of observing people, a student of the game. And if you do that, you'll do better in recruiting and sales. So let's kind of jump in. Now, the easiest thing of those two things I talked about, responsiveness and assertiveness, the easiest thing to spot first is whether they're highly responsive or not. And that's just, you can look at their face. The minute they open the door, the first few seconds, you're going to be able to start to figure out, is this a high or low responsive person? So let's look, we're going to put this on the y-axis, and let's start with high responsive things you can notice. Animated facial expressions. Okay? Again, they do things with their face. Next, I'm going to go fast through these, so you don't, I'll send you the PowerPoint if you want. A lot of hand and body movement. They gesture. Okay? They move more. So watch for that. Flexible time perspective. Typically, high responsive people are like, yeah, what time's the meeting start? 9 o'clock-ish, 9, whatever. And that punctuality may not be their strong suit, okay? They tell stories and anecdotes. They're good storytellers, typically. Now, and we're using some seriously broad brushes here. So just as you go through this, I know some of you analytical types are like, that's not me, that's me. So you're going to have to just, we're doing kind of a broad brush with this. You won't fit everything perfectly. Typically, high responsive people have little emphasis on facts and details. Typically. They share personal feelings, often. They're contact-oriented, which means they may be huggy or handshaky. They may want to touch a little bit more. And they give you immediate nonverbal feedback. Again, the poker situation is good. You'll be able to tell if you're watching them and you're selling or demoing, you'll be able to see with what they're doing with their face and gestures and sounds, you'll be able to tell. You'll be able to read them, you might say, okay? Now, on the other end, the low end of this y-axis, these are people that are less responsive, and these are things to watch for in that. First, they're somewhat expressionless, okay? Like some of you right now. Some of you are sleepy. You're like, this is awesome. Okay, so become more expressionful. It's not a word. Limited hand and body movement. They may be a little more restricted. They may not be flamboyant with their gestures when they're speaking, okay? So watch for that. If they're a little bit more tight into their body, okay, they may be low responsive. They're time disciplined. They may show up on time. They're kind of punctual people because that's important. That's a good thing. Conversation focuses on tasks more than people and stories and things like that. Like, I got through my checklist today. Yeah, it was a good day. But they wouldn't do, yeah, there we go. I got through my checklist today. That was efficient. Okay? Good. They like facts and details. Like facts and details. And they don't share as readily their feelings. It is not to say they don't have feelings. You just don't see them, reverberating off the walls. Okay? So as I'm going through these descriptors, are you starting to kind of peg yourself either on the higher end or on the lower and calmer end? And I got to say, either end is fine. It's not like, oh gosh, it sounds cooler to be on the responsive. I'm going to go with that. Or it sounds, no. So how many people would you say are more, you're on the lower end of our scale here? Just a little more reserved, totally fine, good, excellent. And I assume by the other show of hands, I just want to give you a chance to raise your hands, high responsive. They're like, yay. They're all waving, jumping up and down. Look at me. Okay. All right. Flakes. Now let's go to the x-axis. We've done the y. You're going to see these are put together in a couple of minutes, and it'll be just a beautiful thing. Okay, now let's look at the x-axis. And they're not touchy-feely. Okay, here we go. Assertiveness. Let's start with low assertive people. People that are lower assertive, and now you're going to have to peg yourself on this scale. When you meet them for the first time, they're not as, their eyes will not bore into you. They'll look at you, they'll look away. That's what we mean by intermittent eye contact. Less verbal communication. In other words, they won't talk as much. So you watch for that with Mrs. Jones. They make a little bit more tentative statements, polite, than straight up, directive, bombastic, bleh, here's the deal. Limited gestures, again with hand motions. They're a little quieter. Their voice speed a lot of times is a little bit slower, which is good. A little more monotone. They won't have quite as much fluctuation in the amplitude and timbre and tonality. They're just a little bit more monotone. I just thought I'd use a bunch of cool words for no reason. And they're slower paced. Slower paced. Okay? So they're not as excitable, right? Good. That's the lower assertive. Now let's go to the other end. This will become more interesting in a couple minutes. Steady eye contact. They look at you more. More verbal communication. Emphatic statements, more so than tentative. They gesture more. They're louder. They speak more quickly. And they communicate readily. And they're just faster paced. All right? So you got that scale? Now, who is lower assertive on that scale? Probably you would peg yourself. All right, raise your hand. Say we're looking at least half. All right? And now, the more assertive people, raise your hand. You probably already have been raising your hand. Like, it's my turn. All right, good. Good. So now what do we do with this? Now is where we put this together. Here you've got our scales. You've got the X and Y axis. We're back to plotting graphs. This is so much fun for you math people. And I'm going to go through and describe what each of these four quadrants, how it defines the personality style you're dealing with. All right, the top left-hand corner we're going to call amiables. Amiables. And if you do anything, there's so many different personality profiles, and there's certainly ones that are more complex than what I'm covering today. This is just a real simple format where you could watch somebody and determine how you should sell quickly. So let's look at the amiables. They're slower paced. They're warm and friendly people. They are supportive people. They prefer first names. Make a note when you're selling. Ms. Jones, you mind if I call you by your first name? Yes. Okay, now you're dealing with somebody else. They go, no, I'm Julia. Call me that. Yeah. All right, then you're like, okay, this gives you some clues. They're great listeners. You know anybody in your org that was just like the organizational counselor? I had one when I was a sales manager. I had a guy that was just, everybody wanted a PC with Jody. He was so effective. He was a perfect amiable. Amiable to the second power. Great listener. In fact, people love Jody so much as a listener, my team went to him for PCs a lot of times because I was not effective at first. And so they'd say, hey, this is really good. Do you mind if I talk to Jody? Yeah, why? I go, I'm going to talk to him first, then you can talk to him. Anyway, he was a good listener. They ask a lot of questions. They share personal feelings. They're relationship-oriented. All right? Now, notice on our scales, these are high responsive, but low assertive on our x-axis. So they're readable people, but they're not stomping in the room, taking charge, spreading out. I want to run this committee, right? They're going to be great team players. Oh, all right. And they're not risk takers. So what does that mean if you run into somebody that you go, high responsive, low assertive, and you're trying to recruit them for your team. They avoid risks. So are you going to be, what are you going to need to be with them? Correct, patient, because they may take more time. They may have to come, they may have to look at your Facebook, thing and go through your little info session and your photos, and then you may have to take them to another info session and another one. It takes them a while to make decisions. They don't like to take risks. Let's look at down low. Low assertive, low responsive, we call these analytics, okay, or detectives. Now, analytics are cool. Here is their style. They have a cautious pace. They seek facts and data. They are time disciplined. If the meeting starts at 9:30, they'll be there at 9:30 or earlier. They have a show me attitude. They want proof that what you're saying is true. So if you're just showing Facebook pictures, they may go, I don't care about your friends. Tell me about the history of the company. What? That's odd. Okay. So they want precision. They're structured and organized people typically. And they like solving problems. Okay? Now, is that a helpful person in your organization? Ho, ho, ho. I had a great individual who was a maximum problem solver in my organization. His name was Gary Oschlager. And I didn't like, when I was a sales manager, and it was time to take 120 people and put them into territory area, sales locality, like cars, Walker, who's going to get along with them, where's their closest city. I would sit there and just start sweating because it was just like this giant jigsaw puzzle, and I'm like, I hate this. And so Gary would walk in. He had a pipe. He was like, you want me to do this? And I'm like, Gary, take it. And he'd go, close the door. And he was just like in there, just. And I was like, oh. And then he'd come out and he'd go, here you go. Sales locality sorted. I'm like, yes, Gary, here's some more tobacco. I got you. So he was so good. Now, he wasn't the person to get up in front of a Sunday meeting, was he? Because look, low responsive. He's not going to want to be the entertainer up in front. Let me do the next skit. But he was perfect in the back. Let me sort out the turf for next week. You got an issue? You got kicked out of your team? Okay, I can take care of that. And he would do that. So that's a good person to have in your organization. Is a good person to have in your organization an amiable at the top who's a PC master? Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's look at another quadrant. Expressives. These are people that are highly outgoing and responsive, easy to read, but also kind of like a command and control person a little bit. They don't mind saying, well, we've got our committee. Who wants to run it? I will. They're those people. All right? So they have a quick pace. They're gregarious. Everybody know what that means? Talkative. Good. They're stimulating to be with. You're kind of like, oh, they're full of energy when they're having a full of energy day. When they're not, they're crap to be around. But they're time undisciplined. When's the meeting start? I don't know. I mean, that's not just 9:30-ish. It's just, I don't know. Whatever. It starts when I get there. They're spontaneous. Okay? Like to do things on a whim. They're involvement-oriented. They're risk-takers. What that means, if you peg somebody when you meet them in 5 minutes and you're, holding a little info session or you're talking to somebody, and that you figure out, okay, they're high responsive and they're sort of assertive. So you may not have to give them every single detail. They may just look at some of your pictures on your Facebook, on your photo album that you made, and go, yeah, this sounds cool. I'll do it. And you're like, well, now, have you ever had a customer do that in the summer? They're just like, yeah, we'll get them. And you're like, well, can I just show you more? And they're like, why? And you're like, well, I didn't do my demo. You had that? Those are people that are just like, let's go. And they're probably in this quadrant because they don't need lots of details. They're the opposite of the show me people. I need precision, facts, data, right? Okay, so is this helpful a little bit? You kind of getting it? They have dramatic opinions and actions, and they're enthusiastic people to be around. Okay, I'm going to ask you in a minute where you are. Just remember, if you're like, okay, which quadrant am I? Start with the y-axis, figure out how high or how low you are on that, or near the middle, and then do the assertive scale. And then as those two intersect those lines, and you figure out, that's my quadrant. Let's look at drivers. Drivers are fast-paced people. They're impatient. They're decisive. They're dominant. They're goal-oriented. They like control. They're cool and competitive. And there's my next slide. All right. So, drivers are great administrators. They are take-charge people. And they're like, remember your principal from your school, maybe your high school. A lot of times administrators are drivers because they're comprehensive, they see the big picture, but they also can make decisions. Here's what we need to do, right? I know one of our organizational leaders some years ago was a perfect person to have in an organization because it was struggling. There were a few people going home early. There were folks like, things were kind of shaky, falling apart, and Corey literally just took charge. There's a person over here crying. He stood, I remember at a Sunday meeting, I heard this story. He stood on the picnic table. They were all in a park. He's like, all right, gather around. You, shut up. You, quit crying. Managers, rally around me. Here's what we're going to do. And he started giving assignments. I want you to sort out surf problems. I want you to start PC people. I want you to, and he's just like, I was like, yes, someone's in charge. Hallelujah. And they were like, they needed that to follow. They needed someone strong to follow like that. Would that be a good person to have in your organization? Totally. So let me ask you this. How many of you, if we look at the 4 styles, how many of you would consider yourself, if you plotted those lines, you'd be an amiable? Okay? Good listeners, good counselors, a lot of hugging going on. Awesome. How many of you would be more expressive types? High responsive, pretty high assertive, don't mind running the Sunday meetings, let me do the next skit, Can I stand on stage? Can I have a mic? What are you going to talk about? I don't know, I just need a mic. Okay? How about analytics, our detectives, our problem solvers? Yes, good. We've got a good split in here. This is nice. And how many of you would consider yourself drivers? Okay? Like Commando. Okay, good. All right. So let's look at some typical people and their mottos. Now, this is Michael from The Office. Would be an expressive person, an entertainer, garrulous, kind of goofy. Biggest fear that I wanted to point out here, that fear for expressives is rejection. Okay? So that's something to kind of keep in mind. If you're interviewing and building your team and you run into an expressive, would that be a problem in our business when they get out to the field? Yes, because when someone says no to an expressive, it's like a personal, like, oh, that hurt. It's a big deal. All right? So there's Michael. The amiable. Now, these are probably not great illustrations if you got Toby there, because you're like, crap, I'm an amiable, I'm like Toby, on The Office? No, just go with it. Notice his motto, my office is your office. Welcome. My picnic table is your picnic table. Let's PC. Enjoy. No, put your sales talk aside. I want to visit with you. Okay? You walk into an amiable's home in the summertime, what do you see? Pictures of the kids. You ever had somebody stop you and go, well, where are you from, honey? And you're like, well, I'm from Texas. Like, well, what was that like? Really? How did you get involved? Have you ever had a mom kind of like, amiable? Because that human connection for an amiable is infinitely more important than the fact that, it's got story problems and step by step. They don't even care about that. They want to know, who am I dealing with? Can I trust them? Do I like them? Okay, now look at your product. You see how this might be different from person to person? Okay, their biggest fear is change. So once amiables lock into a system, they're very comfortable. But once change hits, they're, I'm not, help me. Can you see where that would be a problem, saying, we're just going to go to a different part of the country? Where? Oh, we don't know. Who am I going to live with? I don't know. And they're like, what? This is change. So there sometimes takes some time. Analytics, detectives. Here's Angela. Put it in writing. I want to see proof. Don't just show me pictures. Proof. Okay? They're going to take longer to make decisions in the summer. If you're demoing to a detective or an analytic, they're going to want more information. Show me how the index works. You're like, what? Okay. They'll want to like flip through every page in your sample, hoping to get more information. Their biggest fear is making mistakes. Okay? But they don't want to make a mistake. So you're going to have to give them lots of information and detail to make sure that they feel comfortable. All right, drivers. Here's Dwight. They're the fighters. Their motto is do it now. Their fear is loss of control. I think Dwight fits that pretty well as far as... Anyway. All right, so that gives you an idea. Now, how do you deal with the different styles? This is the part where how do we apply this now that we have the framework? With amiables, you've got to recruit them patiently. You have to sell them with patience, within reason. You can't stay there 3 hours to get to know them. Pull out your iPad, start showing pictures of your family. You don't have time, but you're going to have to be patient when you're dealing with amiables. With expressives, you're going to have to be enthusiastic. If you're not an enthusiastic person, you will bore them to death and they will not work with you. Okay? So if you're an analytic and you're kind of quieter and your style is more reserved, but you know you're dealing with an expressive, guess what you're going to have to do? Turn it up a notch and be something that's not comfortable for you. Because you're not selling the way you want to buy, right? What are you selling? The way they want to be sold to. You want to communicate in their language. Okay? So if you went to France, would it be good to know a little French? Yes. All of us speak different languages in terms of how we make contact and interact. Analytics, you have to deal with them precisely. Precision is good. Drivers, you need to deal with them speedily. If you run into people like that in their homes, you're like, well, so how long have you lived here in Tonganoxie? And they're like, what are you talking about? Show me what you got. And you're like, whoa. Get to it, kid. And you're like, okay. Is that a person that likes control? Yeah. Sure. So now, here's my problem. I didn't get this my first summer. What we tend to do is when something isn't working, we do more of our default mode. My default mode was, I need to do more of me. So I would just turn up the enthusiasm, And so I'd be sitting in the house going, I need to connect with people. So I would lay back in the chair and go, and they're like, get to it. And the more they were like this, I was more, okay, my tendency would be to be laid back a little bit. So I'm like trying to tell jokes. Yeah, I'm from Kansas. The state tree is the telephone pole. Ha, ha, ha. And they're like, what? So the more I was me, and I was the opposite of one of these other styles, the more I turned up me, the more awkward it got. So I got people that almost threw me out of their house because I was just like following the sales stuff. Anyway, you get the idea? So yeah, now here's where it gets really funky. If you look at the graph, and we're doing calculus now. The people in the top two quadrants are fast-paced. Are relationship-oriented. Their priority is people. The bottom two quadrants, the priority is tasks. So you can see also that pace on the right two quadrants, is that right for you? Yes, is fast. With drivers, you got to be fast. Expressives, you got to be fast. With the amiables and the analytics, you got to just back it down, slow it down a little bit, okay? So you've got priority issues and pace issues. And then the people that really drive you crazy, this was the big eureka moment for me, are the folks that were in cross quadrants. Like drivers drive amiables crazy because they're so task-focused and like, let's go, follow me up the hill. And they're carrying the flag, come on. And the amiables are like, how does everybody feel about that? Are you okay? Should we go together? Come on, That sounded like Pat Roach just then. Anyway. So, this is when I started figuring out, gosh, I know why my organization works and doesn't work. Like I told you about Jody. Remember the guy that was the amiable? He was like high and totally non-assertive. He was like off the scale amiable, which made him a great counselor. But when he would call in stats, when we had to actually call in stats. Some of you do Google Docs now, but we would call in stats every night. And Jody was an organizational leader, and he would call in stats to our director, who was a driver. It was a nightmare because Jody was like, his stats calls were like this. Roy would say, hello, hey, this is Jody. Okay, hey, Jody, how's it going? Let's hear your stats, because they have like a couple minutes to get all the stats for everybody. He'd say, okay, let's see, let me tell you about Angela. Yeah, he's like, start time. And Joe's like, I think we started around 7:55. Yeah, somewhere, I think in there. And he's like, okay, stop time, 9:30. You know what? Let me tell you about Angela. She's doing so much better. And Roy's like, get to it. I need the numbers. He's like, well, no, she's just really improving it. And he's like, Jody, that's great. Give me the stats. Okay? So there's this tension, right? Because Jody was concerned about the person improving and the human side of it, and then Roy was very interested in the stats, so he could help from that end. So there was a natural tension. They drive each other nuts, see? And I've known people I knew a guy that worked with me who was a sales manager for a few years, whose wife was a driver, and he was an amiable. And when he looked at this, he goes, now I know why we don't like each other a lot sometimes. I'm like, there you go, Jack. So I charged him a fee for counseling. Now, expressives and analytics are opposites. See that? So analytics look at expressive people and think, crazy, goofy, excitable flakes. That's kind of what they think. And then expressives look at the analytics and go, slow, boring, gee whiz, why can't you blink your eyes? So, I'm just making that up. So, here's what I figured out, and here's how this was useful to me. A couple little stories. But I remember when I was recruiting at Kansas State one time, and for some reason, when the students managers on campus had all gotten into like an engineering section, and they had all recruited for that info session, it was probably about 10 engineer types. And so I was running the info session, and I was ready to put on my kind of entertaining show. Let's get people to laugh and to like me, and we'll have a great time. So I'm going along, and I'm just having them introduce, and I'm writing down their names, and I'm like, okay, and what do you study? And the first guy's like, electrical engineering. I'm like, oh, that's awesome. Boy, that's challenging. Engineering, I hear you do math. And he's like, yes. And I'm like, okay. Next guy. I'm like, and he's like, aeronautical engineering. I'm like, aeronautical. All right. I don't really know what that means, but that's cool. Next, accountant. I'm like, oh, you're in accounting? Yes. I'm like, all right. I wrote that down. I'm like, uh-oh. Next one was like civil engineering. Next one was like robotics. I'm not making this up. I'm like, robotic, okay. So he was like, yes, anyway. And I'm just like, so an entire group, and I'm thinking in my head, if you're kind of pegging who would be in what quadrant are we dealing with? The analytics, big time. So typically engineers, accountants, those are people that would gravitate to that area. So I'm thinking, my normal mode would be, I'm not getting my point across. I need to do more of this, gesture and I knew from reading the book and everything, and I thought, okay, I'm going to do things completely contrary. This is some of this. I'm going to have pace problems with these people. I'm going to have priority problems, and they want precision. So I went to the dry erase board, picked up a marker, and I said, all right, gentlemen, it was all men. I'm going to give you all the facts, details, and data for which you can render a logical decision in the next 89 minutes. So if you would, take out your mechanical pencils and remove the tape from the center of your glasses. And let's begin. I made that part up. And so I went to the board, and I wanted to write things down, because when you put things down on the board, people go, and I was like, you may want to write this down. Because whatever you write down on the board, they write down. They're like, okay, this is important. So they're like, and off we went. And I put my arms to my side, and I turned down the volume, and I slowed down a little bit. And 9 out of 10 of those, I think, wanted to come work with us. Because I went to their style rather than me. Because when people like, you can write this down, likes like likes. Likes like likes. People like people who are like them. So if they feel like, from the beginning, I get this person, I'm tracking with them, they're like me, all is well. So that's a dramatic example of going to their style. But in the first few minutes, you definitely, when you're selling, when you're with Mrs. Jones, you want to try to figure out what style are they, go to that style. Does that make sense? Okay? So what do we do? Let's go to this next one. There's positives and negatives from each style. Each of these, there's no good or bad about any quadrant. Each of these has their own strength and weakness. On the positive side of amiables, they're supportive people, they're reliable, they are team players. They're very pleasant. Downside, they're complying, they're retiring, and they're soft-hearted. Okay? Has it ever been the case that you have a first-year person who's not working, and so they're not selling, and they've been worked with, and it's later, it's like week 7 or week 8, and they haven't done well, and it's time for them to not participate anymore as an independent contractor with Southwestern? Have you seen anyone like that? It's just like they're just not, it's not going to happen. So my advice is they should probably do something else if they're not going to work fully and participate and sell bucks. Amiables will fight to the end for somebody. Yeah, I know it's week 8 and they've only sold 7 units all summer. And they're in the hole about $900. But you know, I really feel like next week they promise that they're going to pull it together. Yeah, okay. That's the downside of the amiables. Okay? They're soft heart. Everything, every personality strength that God's given you, it's just like a sword. It's like, shing. Wow, look at that blade. It's really sharp. It also has another dark side. There's 2 sides to the blade. Ugh. They're too soft-hearted. Okay? They'll be pushed up. They'll let people walk over them. Sometimes they have a little sign on their chest that says, welcome, because they become a doormat. So, amiables, if you feel back here, if this little structure here, that's your spine. So you need to use it sometimes. All right. I'll make fun of the other styles, don't worry. Oh, that really hurt me. I know. Analytics. All right, analytics. You are diligent. This is positive. You are perseverant. You are systematic. Downside, picky, righteous, well, and stiff, unbending. Okay? I had a great analytic guy that worked with me besides Gary. His name was Roger Dirksen. And Roger, when I first met him at a career fair, he was like the poster child for accounting majors. I mean, he looked the part. He actually had the pocket protector. I think he probably had a huge, Calcula HP in his pocket. And when I shook his hand, it was just like, oh my. I mean, and he just was like, nice to meet you. And I was like, okay. And he wanted to come to an info session. And Roger was like, he was from Western Kansas, and here's the good news about Roger. He was such a systems guy that, did he memorize the talk word for word? Absolutely. Diligently. Watching him work when I worked with him was painful. He was like, the next paragraph is, and Ms. Jones is like looking at me like, did you bring a rope? Is he an android? I'm like, no, keep listening. So no connection whatsoever to the people, but nothing deterred him from his schedule. Nothing got him off his sales presentation. And after about week 4, started figuring it out, started connecting better, ended up being a top first year, ended up selling 8 summers. And but he was such an accounting guy. So these guys, once they lock into the system, you got them. So that's your goal as you're recruiting people that are analytics. Expressives, Positive, they're invigorating, they're optimistic, they're animated. Downside, they're too excitable, they're impatient, and they can be persuasive to the point of manipulation. Whoa. Hello. You know? And I've had students tell me when I was younger, and I'm in this style if you haven't figured it out, that I just, I was so intent on closing that and I've had people on my team like, I just felt like you're bending me. Like, what? But when you tell them that, like you're being manipulative, that's just like, again, rejection. Really tough. So anyway, keep that in mind. Expressives, you may have to tone it down just a little bit. All right, drivers are firm, comprehensive, they're productive, they get things done. Downside, they're uncompromising, they're overbearing, they're pressuring. Got that? All right. Don't you have to write all this down. Just get the main idea. See? That's an expressive answer. Just get the idea. Move on. Analytics. Please leave it up. Okay. Now, when we're stressed, we react differently. Let me go through this rapidly. An amiable submits. They go, okay, hey, fine. Have it your way. Under stress, pressure. They'll submit. Now, they may come back and get you in another way, but for the moment, submit. Expressive, attack. Somebody comes and says, you know what? I don't really like GRS. I thought it sucked. I go, you know what? You don't have to come, butthole. How about that? Get out. This is my program. I know it's good. So that's what you probably hear from me. Don't say it to me. Analytics will withdraw under pressure or stress. I remember we had a meeting at the company, and it was a heated discussion, and one of the women from accounting was just a total analytic, and she just was like, you could see her just fold up. She was like, please stop. And she sort of went concave on herself. She went into her own event horizon. She collapsed on herself into a black hole. She disappeared. Couldn't even look at people. Wow. Drivers dictate. Under pressure, they just, okay, I'm taking charge. Let's go. Boof, boof, boof. So, you got to remember, under stress, we react differently. Now, we all drive, even this goes to the point of what kind of cars people drive. Expressives, bright colored sport cars. Hey, how do I look? Okay. Analytics, something very practical. A Volvo, because they've done all the crash study and the mileage check. Okay, MPG's good. All right, that's probably what they'll buy, something really practical. Amiables, what would they buy? Yeah, all right, I think more of a minivan. Who, come on in? No, it's seat 7. Come on in. We're all together. We're all together. Okay? Yeah. And drivers they own Hummers. That's just the deal. Just, oh, is that a curb? Or a tank. Maybe a Sherman tank. So, all right, let me just do this. Let's peg a few people and see if you're kind of understanding this. I wrote down a few people here, and I want you to tell me what you think they are. And understand that you can be a mixture of these. You're not just pure amiable. Depending on where you plot those numbers, you could be an analytic expressive. Does that make sense? Mostly expressive with a little analytic in there. That's like Jamocha almond fudge. Okay, it's almond fudge. It's got a Jamocha a little in there. Okay, so you can have some weird stuff like an amiable driver. You don't see that a lot. And if you break each of those quadrants into 4 quadrants, you can have like a driver, or an expressive driver. So this is a way to kind of flavor it a little bit. All right, so let's look at some one. How about Haley Price? Or which would she be? Expressive. I'm Haley Price, and I am also Lexi. All right, expressive. How about Ryan Davis? If you know him. I would say more in the analytic quadrant mostly. Okay, let's do easier ones. Mark Rao. Driver. Yeah, easy answer. That's a good one. What about, let's say, Jake Swenson? Expressive. Hey, is there a video? I'll do it. You know, hey, look, a microphone. I make it. Why are you up there, Jake? I don't know, but I love it. All right. What about, let's see, Pete Burgess? You know Pete? He's mostly analytic with some amiable in there. How about Yvette Keister? An analytical driver? I would say she's mostly analytic, and she's probably adapted herself to that is her most common mode. Now, being in our business, she may have had to add some driver in there just to survive. Okay? Understand that all these quadrants are good, but you've got to have all four in your organization to do well. So I want you to appreciate the differences. If you walked into a meeting that was all amiables, there wouldn't be a meeting because people would just be like hugging for 30 minutes. How are you been? How you? Oh, it's so good. How are your kid? Okay. So you got to have a driver in there just to say, hey, it's time to start. Okay. What if you walked into a group of expressives and were all 100%? No, just telling jokes and like, yeah, oh, you got a new car, you know, whatever. I like that orange jacket. Craziness. Nothing would get done, but people have a good time. Woo, what happened in the meeting? I don't know. Who cares? It was great. What'd you do? Nothing. All right. Analytics, if you had a whole room of them and that's all you had, or in your organization, it would be very punctual and efficient, and people would be, dead asleep in the aisles. Okay? But it would be on time. And drivers, our company a few years ago, with our former set of directors, they were 100% drivers except for Dave Causer. 100%. So what were those director meetings like? Fist fights. Because they were like, no, my way. No, this is the way the company should operate. And, somebody else, no, this is the way we're going to do it. So it was a lot. Our former president, Jerry Heffel, was more or less a referee more than anything else. Because each one just thought, well, it's my way or the highway. Obviously, I'm right. So anyway, appreciate the fact that all these quadrants are useful, they're different, and your goal, if I'm going to give you an assignment, this is my final slide for this seminar, so I want you to go out as you meet people later this afternoon, and I want you to peg, okay, high responsive, low responsive, okay, they seem this, and then assertive, higher, and just figure out what quadrant they're and ask them, because a lot of them know this material, Even the Estonians, they were like, aimable, drivable, That video, that was cool. They got the concept of the four quadrants. So figure out who am I dealing with, go to their style to relate to them, and you'll have much better success. If you've noticed, you only sell 1 out of every 4 people you talk to. That's because you're selling the quadrant that's just like you. They're comfortable with you, you're comfortable with them, sale. Once you can move around to these different quadrants and sell the way they want to be sold, your closing percentage goes up because you're relating to them in a way they want to be related to. Make sense? Helpful? Yes. Okay, we're done. Well done. Thank you. Give yourselves a hand. Woohoo!